The city of Buenos Aires breathes with a rhythm all its own. It is a city of faded European grandeur and fierce Latin passion, of wide avenues and narrow, shadow-filled side streets, where tango music seems to seep from the very bricks. On the morning of January 13th, 2006, the affluent northern suburb of Acasuso was slumbering in the thick, humid heat of a summer Saturday. The air was heavy, syrupy, moving with a lethargic breeze that did little to cool the skin. On Avenida del Libertador, the Banco Río stood as a temple to solidity and security, its polished granite facade reflecting the hazy sun. It was a day for family lunches, for slow sips of mate in shaded parks, for the quiet closing of shops in the afternoon siesta. It was the perfect day to dismantle a fortress, not by breaking down its walls, but by rewriting the very story of what was happening inside them. The plan was born not in a moment of violence, but in a moment of profound understanding. The understanding that the greatest vulnerability of any system is not its technology but the human brain's need to create a narrative, to connect dots and see patterns, even where none exist. The mastermind, a ghost who has never been definitively named, understood this better than any security expert. He wasn't planning a robbery, he was planning a play. The bank was his stage, the city his audience, and the police his unwitting supporting cast. The actors began to arrive just after noon, slipping into their roles with the ease of professionals. They did not arrive in a single suspicious vehicle. They came separately, in pairs, at staggered intervals, blending into the trickle of Saturday customers. They were not masked men. They were men in polo shirts and slacks, their faces open, their movements casual. The first one through the door was a lookout, his eyes scanning the interior, noting the positions of the guards, the cameras, the employees. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible signal. The transformation was swift and silent. Weapons appeared from under shirts, from bags. There was no shouting, no dramatic proclamation, just a low, firm voice. Everyone on the ground. Now, the command was so calm, so devoid of hysteria, that it was more terrifying than any scream could have been. The few customers, a woman with her daughter, an elderly man depositing a check, a young couple froze for a second, their minds refusing to process the scene, before obeying, sinking to the cool marble floor. The bank guards, trained for a frontal assault, were utterly disarmed by the quiet, total control. They were disarmed and forced to join the others. Then came the next act in the psychological drama. The hostages were ordered to remove their clothes, to strip down to their underwear. This was a calculated masterstroke. It was not about humiliation for its own sake. It was about power. It was about reducing doctors, businessmen, mothers, to a state of primal vulnerability. A person lying on the cold floor in their underwear, shivering despite the warmth, is not thinking of heroism. They are thinking of survival, of shame, of the chilling exposure. They were bound with plastic zip ties, their personal space utterly violated. They were no longer individuals. They were a collective, docile entity. And the robbers, they became performers. They pulled on their costumes, cheap plastic Halloween masks, a grotesque clown, a snarling monster, a leering ghoul. The contrast was jarring, surreal. The professional, efficient movements of their bodies were crowned with these faces of carnival horror. They spoke to the hostages in polite, almost soothing tones. "Remain calm, please. This will be over soon, and no one will be hurt." This veneer of civility was a more effective weapon than any curse. It created a bizarre, terrifying cognitive dissonance that kept the hostages off balance, compliant. The focus was the manager, a man named Miguel. He was separated from the herd, a gun pressed not violently, but insistently, against his ribs. He was the linchpin. He knew the codes, the timers, the intricate dance required to open the vault. He was led to the massive, circular vault door, a masterpiece of German engineering that weighed several tons. Under the silent pressure of the gun, his hands trembling, He input the codes. The heavy locks disengaged with a series of deep resonant clunks. The door swung open, revealing the heart of the beast. Inside, it was Aladdin's cave. Safe deposit boxes lined the walls, hundreds of them, each one holding the secrets and treasures of their owners. The robbers set to work with the methodical efficiency of a surgical team. They used crowbars and drills, the sounds of tearing metal and splintering wood echoing in the sterile, air-conditioned chamber. They were not greedy amateurs. They were curators, selecting what was valuable and portable. Cash, primarily, jewels, bearer bond. They filled large, sturdy sports bags, their movements economical, practiced. They worked for hours. The afternoon sun outside began its slow descent, and then the narrative began its deliberate, brilliant twist. The lead robber, the one in the clown mask, made a show of checking his watch. He conferred with another, a monster mask, nodding in agreement. It was time for the final act. The hostages were untied. Their clothes were returned to them. They were instructed, calmly, to get dressed and to walk out of a side door, one by one, at intervals. Walk slowly. Do not run. Tell the police there are many of us, heavily armed. The first hostage, the elderly man, stumbled out into the blinding afternoon light. He raised his hands, his voice a croak. They're in there, so many of them, with machine guns. The police, who had by now been alerted by a silent alarm, descended. The street was sealed. SWAT teams in black body armor took positions. Snipers nestled onto rooftops, their scopes trained on the bank's window. Through those windows, they could see the figures in the grotesque masks moving, occasionally waving a weapon. The scene was set for a classic, tense siege. The media arrived, their satellite trucks lining the streets. The world watched. Negotiators established a phone link. The voice on the other end was calm, but unyielding. They made demands, then retracted them. They strung the police along. The hours stretched. Dusk began to settle over Acasuso, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. The police, their nerves frayed, their adrenaline peaking, prepared for a final assault. They were convinced they were dealing with a large, well-armed, and dug-in criminal enterprise. The breach, when it came, was an explosion of controlled violence. Tear gas canisters were launched through windows. Armored vehicles rammed the doors. Officers swarmed in, a flood of black tactical gear, and shouted commands. They cleared the main hall, the offices, their weapons sweeping every corner. They reached the vault. It was open, ransacked, and it was empty. The robbers were gone, vanished. All that remained were the discarded Halloween masks, lying on the floor like the shed skins of serpents. The police stood in bewildered silence, the reality dawning on them. They had been surrounding a goat. The heavily armed gang had been a handful of men. The hostages they had so carefully processed and released had included the robbers themselves, who had simply walked out, patted on the back by sympathetic officers, and melted into the city. The entire siege, the hours of tension, had been a meticulously orchestrated illusion, a grand piece of theater designed to occupy the police while the actors made their escape. The investigation that followed was a monument to frustration. The loot was gone, and while the official figure was placed in the millions, rumors swirled that it was far more, or that the robbers had taken only a specific pre-targeted haul. Some of the men were eventually caught. Years later, their stories fragmented and contradictory. But the architect, the director of this brilliant play, was never found. The money was never recovered. The Banco Rio robbery endures not because of its violence, but because of its genius. It was a crime of intellect, a lesson in the psychology of perception. They proved that the most impenetrable lock, the most alert guard, the most sophisticated alarm, is useless against a story well told. They didn't crack the safe. They cracked the code of human expectation. They left behind more than an empty vault. They left a haunting question mark over the nature of reality itself. In a world of security cameras and forensic science, they demonstrated that the most powerful tool is still the human mind's ability to be deceived, to believe the story it is shown, even when that story is a lie. So the next time you walk past a bank, with its imposing facade and its promise of security, remember the men in the Halloween masks. Remember that the greatest heists aren't those that steal money, but those that steal the truth. leaving behind only a perfect, beautiful, and terrifying fiction.